Oh man, I evacuated out of this studio a couple of different times and headed to the coast. And yeah, I think I probably tore equipment out of my studio at least 3 separate times and brought it back and connected it all again. For anybody who's got a studio and you've gone to the work and effort to dial it in, that's a pain in the. Well, am I ever excited to be putting together a brand new little portable rig, a powerful little DAW that I can just put under my arm and take with me. This is in an effort to avoid all the chaos that I was going through last summer with our wildfires. I live up in the interior of British Columbia, and I am surrounded by forest. Really dry forest. I'm talking like, decades of dry material building up on that forest floor. We're all experiencing the same sort of stuff. Our forests are drying up. They're dying from beetle kill and all kinds of stuff. And it just creates an incredibly volatile situation on the forest floor. We'll have things like a dry electrical storm come through and ignite over 100 forest fires in one storm. Can you possibly imagine being responsible for that? Where do you even start to put the resources on that? Yeah, I have to be prepared to roll. There's no way that I'm going to hang out for any length of time when that situation is going on outside, because it's scary, right? Terrifying. Well, last summer, in an effort to sort of avoid being evacuated and stuck in the wrong place, we sort of preemptively evacuated. I packed up my studio and I went to the coast. And just because of my schedule, I had to bring my equipment back and forth and set it up and tear it down too many times. So in an effort to avoid that forever, I'm going to go ahead and put a little Pro Tools system together on my MacBook Air. This is a 2020 MacBook Air with an M1, and there's a very specific way that I like to go about building systems like this. So let's get into it. All right, now one of the first things that I like to do when I'm putting a system like this together is to make it a dual boot system. Many of you are very familiar with what I'm talking about, but I want the internal hard drive of this MacBook Air to have 2 completely separate operating systems on it. With the new file structure system, this is a really easy procedure. Back in the day, if you wanted to partition your internal hard drive, you literally had to wipe it clean and start from scratch. And, it was a very complicated process. In today's file structure system, I'm able to create what's called a container. And there's a couple of different ways we can go about creating a dual boot system. We don't actually need to create 2 separate containers. The new file system has the ability for me to be able to create another volume inside the main container, one that I would be able to put another operating system on. The challenge that I have with that is that those 2 operating systems and those 2 volumes are going to be sharing some of the space that's in that hard drive. This is something that I want to avoid like the plague. I want these 2 systems to be completely independent of one another. I don't want them sharing anything. So the way I go about that is to go ahead and create a new container using disk utility. Okay, we're looking at disk utility, and I've got the internal hard drive, the Macintosh HD selected. You can see it's a 500 gig hard drive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight up here and I'm going to hit the partition button. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new partition. Do you want to add a volume to the APFS container, or do you want to divide the container storage into 2 separate partitions? When an Apple file system container has multiple volumes, its free space is shared and can be allocated to any of the individual volumes as needed. So I'm going to hit Add Partition. I'll split these 2 partitions evenly as far as size goes, and I'll name this new partition or container Pro Tools, and we'll hit Apply. So I've got a message saying that things are about to change, but nothing's going to be erased. So I can go ahead and hit Partition. Resizing the startup volume will cause this computer to stop responding. Do not power off this computer while resizing is occurring. This may last for several minutes or hours. I hope not. Continue. Well, apparently there's time to go get another cup of tea, so back in a minute. Yeah, that didn't take very long. I just got back with my tea and it's already finished. So, boom, we just divided the internal hard drive of my MacBook Air into 2 separate containers. When I go double click on my Macintosh HD, it looks just like it should. It's got all my applications and everything else in it, right? Close that up. Let's go click on the new Pro Tools. Yeah, absolutely nothing in this side, right? So let's go ahead as the next step and install OS X on this new Pro Tools container or partition. Now, I take the time in advance to go to all of the websites and download all of the installers. This is something that I've been in the practice of doing for some time now. You know, for many of you, you're probably very much the same as me. You know, when you go back to building a system, in some cases you haven't logged into some of these websites and, you know, some of these software developers for maybe 2 years, maybe a year and a half or something like that. So while I'm doing an installation like I'm doing today, I don't like to have the distraction of, you know, entering a website and realizing that you forgot your password or they've updated their system and they require you to update your password. Yeah, that's a bunch of nonsense when you're in the middle of doing a big installation. Last night I came down to the studio and on my main system downloaded and saved all of the installers that I'm going to need today. And I put them on an external drive. So I've just finished copying the Monterey installer into my applications folder of the main Macintosh hard drive. And I've launched it. So let's continue. By default, it's telling me that it's going to put Monterey on the disk Macintosh HD. Well, I don't want that. I'm going to show all disks, and I'm going to go ahead and I want to put this on Pro Tools. I hit continue. And of course, we're doing a clean install, right, from scratch, so it's going to take a few minutes. You know, the reason that I like to take this time to create a dual boot system up front is that it'll give you so many options down the road. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's going to be a point where I'm going to want to unplug this thing. There's going to be a point where I've got Pro Tools rocking, where I've got all my third-party plugins and everything's just tuned like a Ferrari and working beautifully. When that happens generally on a system that I'm working in professionally, I like to pull the plug. In other words, I like to stop messing with that hard drive. No more software updates, no more anything like that. Well, the problem with that is, of course, if you interrupt software update at any given time throughout the life of something like a MacBook Air, well, at some point after you cut off those updates, that computer is just not going to be secure anymore. There's going to be updates that are required in order to be able to continue using this computer on the internet and stuff like that. This is where the real advantage of a dual boot system comes into play because, of course, I'll be able to continue to keep this Macintosh HD fully updated with the latest software for years to come. And I can choose at any given time to sort of unplug my Pro Tools side. All right, so when Monterey finished installing, it automatically restarted and mounted from the Pro Tools side. So now we're looking at a dual boot system. And that 500 gig internal hard drive that I split in two, that's plenty big enough for my needs to be able to run Pro Tools and all kinds of different third-party software. Remember, as a pro, I'm not a fan of putting anything on this internal hard drive other than an operating system and all of my applications that I need to run. All of my content goes on external drives, always. Photo libraries, video, you know, all my audio files, song files, libraries, everything is going to be stored off-site. I don't want that stuff living inside my internal drive. There's no reason to spend way too much money on these things by, you know, getting 2 terabyte drives and stuff. Just makes these completely unaffordable. It's not necessary. I'm only using this thing as a brain. This is my operating system. All of my data exists on external drives. So, you know, splitting that drive into 250 gig, you know, partitions or containers in this case, it's plenty of space. You know, I went and checked my desktop system and yeah, I've got so much software on my Pro Tools side of that one, and still it's nowhere near the amount of space that I have available to me. So let's get started. So yeah, nice clean portable setup, right? Where I could just close the lid, unplug a few peripherals, throw it all in a bag and head out the door. It's a lot easier than tearing apart my studio for the 14th time, right? Thank you for sitting in on today's session. I hope some of these ideas help.